The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is nearly out, and I think it's fair to say it has some big boots to fill. Breath of the Wild was considered by many, us included, to be a 10 out of 10 game, so unless Nintendo plan on inventing numbers higher than 10, they're really going to have to raise the bar with this game. Having said that, as someone who's played every Zelda game and put over 100 hours into Breath of the Wild, here are my suggestions on how Nintendo can make The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom even greater. Before we start, I just want to mention that 99.8% of our viewers haven't subscribed to our channel. To the 0.2%, thank you so much for the support, and to the people who are watching this and haven't subscribed yet, maybe consider it if you enjoy what you're seeing. Now, I'm going to have to address this right off the bat. While these are my suggestions to make my perfect Breath of the Wild sequel, that doesn't mean I wish these things had been different in Breath of the Wild. Everything in that game works together so well that even changing something relatively small would likely stand out and have a knock-on effect. These are just my changes to make Tears of the Kingdom as good as I know it can be, because I know I can't be alone in not just wanting a Breath of the Wild 2 here. I want Tears of the Kingdom to really stand on its own 2 feet and be a great game in its own right, not just because it feels like more of Breath of the Wild. It might sound like I have doubts about whether it can achieve this, but I don't at all. There were 6 years between Skyward Sword, which came out in 2011, and the next Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, which is a lot of time, and you can really feel it with the amount of polish in the game. Tears of the Kingdom will be coming out another 6 years after that, in 2023. If you consider the amount they can carry over and work on from Breath of the Wild, that is a lot of time to mold this game into its own thing. Nintendo also has an amazing track record with making direct Zelda sequels feel unique. Majora's Mask takes place right after Ocarina of Time finishes, and came out only a year and a half after it, and even with all the reused assets in the game, it is undeniably its own thing. Wind Waker on the GameCube leads into Phantom Hourglass on the DS, which keeps the cel-shaded style, but totally changes the gameplay in order to accommodate the new hardware it's being played on. Phantom Hourglass's sequel, Spirit Tracks, then continues to innovate by letting you conduct a train. That sounds sarcastic, but it's not meant to be. The game is great, and being able to control Link and Zelda in the same adventure was a lot of fun. There's also a Link Between Worlds, which takes place in the same map as A Link to the Past, but uses new items and powers to navigate it in a whole new way. So, let's get into the first thing I want to talk about, and that's the map of Tears of the Kingdom. The map in Breath of the Wild was vast. Nintendo did an amazing job of taking areas we were already familiar with in the Zelda universe and fitting them together in a world without any loading screens. But personally, that wasn't even the most impressive thing about the map. To me, it's how dense it is. I play a lot of open world games, but I find that even when they let me go wherever I want, they so rarely give me a reason to actually explore. Breath of the Wild did not have this issue for me. It genuinely felt like I could check every cave, every pool of water, every cliff, every valley and find something to make it worth my time. Whether it was a chest, a Korok seed, a side quest, a lore tidbit, or a shrine which would open up a fast travel spot. And with 120 shrines scattered about the map, this meant being free to explore as far as I wanted without needing to do the boring backtracking bit. I could just teleport back to where I started and choose a new direction to walk in. I spent a lot of time thinking about whether I want the new game to take place in the same Hyrule as Breath of the Wild, or if they should put it in a new region like Majora's Mask did with Termina. The obvious downside to us being back in Hyrule is that we've already explored it. As someone who did get all 120 shrines, I feel like I've put my time in with Hyrule, and having to go around to complete the next 120 whatevers they put in the game will feel too much like treading old ground. Sure, they can expand the towns and build more structures, but the general landscape would stay the same. It would literally be treading old ground. A new land would let us explore new biomes, encounter new characters and creatures, and experience a story that isn't limited by the constraints of Hyrule. In the end though, I did decide against this, and now I feel it would almost be a waste if this game wasn't set in Hyrule. At that point, they might as well not make it a sequel, it could just be another Zelda game using a similar gameplay style. By setting the game in Hyrule, we get to see what I was hoping to see in the Breath of the Wild DLC, a Hyrule that was recovering from the calamity. Walking through the ruins of Castle Town, and all the other ruins for that matter, was great for setting the tone of the game, but I am so ready for a land that isn't just surviving, but thriving. I want a bustling city with little minigames just for the sake of it, like the Shooting Gallery or Sploosh Kaboom. Okay, maybe not Sploosh Kaboom, I think we've suffered enough with that one. I want to come across a fully rebuilt Lon Lon Ranch, not just the little stables scattered around the map as checkpoints. I want to see Tarrey Town, which I spent so much time helping to build, expanded out even further, even if it does currently look like they're pretty much out of room. Maybe they've hollowed out the inside of the pillar they're on, or built more space down on the water to create a floating ring. Basically, I'm hoping for the desolate, lonely feeling from Breath of the Wild to be completely replaced by a new sense of hope and regrowth. And maybe sometimes it'll be okay if they mention the floating castle in the middle of it all. Also, I really hope this area here isn't Castle Town again because it looks like ruins, and I really just want a proper Castle Town in this game. Please, Nintendo. Of course, we've already seen that there'll be at least one new place to go, with the sky opening up to us. This could be very interesting, although we haven't seen the scope of this new land yet. Will it be like Skyloft and have a few islands and a few things to do on each, or will it be a fully interconnected map of the entirety of Hyrule? I can see the benefits of each, but as I've already mentioned, I've explored Hyrule in detail, so I'd be very happy with a whole new map in the sky. If I can be a little greedy and ask for even more than they've already shown us though, I would love to get some sort of Dark World in this game. We've been able to explore the Dark World before in top-down games such as Link to the Past, but when it comes to 3D Zeldas, we've never really been able to explore it. Twilight Princess has the Twilight Realm, and Skyward Sword has the Sacred Realm, which eventually becomes the Dark Realm, but they've always been little sections in the game. I think if we finally got a fully explorable Dark Realm, or whatever realm that's basically a mirror of Hyrule, that would ensure a fresh new map with plenty of content. We'd start the game with a completed Hyrule that we could check out all the new big developed areas in, without having to scour out every corner of it again. Move on to the land in the sky as we get more powers that let us traverse it easier, and eventually get transported to the Dark Realm, where we can once again have an empty map that we need to explore to fill in. We even have 999 Dark Korok seeds to find there too. There's just one more thing I think we need in the new map of Tears of the Kingdom, and it really deserves its own section.
The beast. When the beast regains its true power, this world will face its end.
The dungeons in Breath of the Wild were honestly one of the biggest letdowns for me. The quests and fights you had to do to get into them, however, were another story. I loved everything about how unique the quests were for each beast and how it related to the tribes protecting it. It's just such a shame that you finally get into the beast and they all look exactly the same. Each dungeon had its own gimmick, but they all boiled down to moving the beast in a way to open up the path forward, so you could press 5 buttons and unlock the boss. You could basically get those buttons in any order too, which does reinforce the idea that Breath of the Wild can be completed in whatever order you want, but unfortunately sort of reduces the dungeon into 5 separate puzzles and gets rid of the feeling of progression you'd get in the dungeons of the older games. The bosses of each dungeon also missed the mark quite a bit, at least design-wise. They all looked far too similar to each other, which isn't a problem I've really had with a Zelda game before. The fights themselves were fine, but it would have been more interesting if they had each corrupted something different and given it a makeover in their own style. Imagine if the water boss had been a corrupted Wizrobe. It had grown in size with loads of malice arms and each one was holding a magic rod. Or if the lightning boss was a regular moblin that got corrupted and becomes one of the hardest bosses in the game, shooting lightning at you while it flies around and making you parry its super quick moves. I know this game already has an issue with the enemy variety, and my idea wouldn't do anything to change that, but I feel like they really could have been designed to be distinct from regular enemies and from each other. So, how would I change dungeons for Tears of the Kingdom? Well, it might not be the most popular idea, but I would essentially go back to how they were in the previous games. This means a couple of things to me, the main points being giving them a set order to be completed in, and actually having permanent items that you need to complete the dungeon, and upcoming dungeons. By all means, have 2 or 3 dungeons you can choose to go in at a time, but make it so you have to finish all of them before you can move on to the next set of dungeons. The story would benefit greatly from this. Breath of the Wild didn't really have this issue because most of the story was told in memories, and they could be unlocked in any order, as they're going towards painting the bigger picture of helping Link remember the whole story. I'm hoping for Tears of the Kingdom to have a more active story, and that will be much harder to do if we can still beat every dungeon in any order. It isn't just the story that I think will benefit from doing the dungeons in a set order either. Something I've loved about dungeons in previous games was getting an item and having to use it to complete that dungeon. Then in the next dungeon, I'd have to use that item and whatever new item I got there to get to the end of it, until I was at the last dungeon and had to use all the items together in new ways to finish the game. This is where that sense of progression came from. You'd come across a puzzle and try to figure out if it was possible yet, and if not, you'd make a note to come back once you had an item that would let you solve it, and take whatever goodies you were rewarded with. Some items would be used very often after you got them, like the bow or the hook shot, whereas others had more limited uses, like the spinner from Twilight Princess. But even once you got the spinner, you'd have a moment where all the dotted lines you were seeing around Hyrule suddenly made sense, and you understood how to reach the end of them. This is what I feel like is missing from Breath of the Wild, because as amazing as it is that you can leave the plateau and essentially solve every puzzle from the get-go, it's also quite limiting. It's why so many of the Korok seeds were locked behind having to throw something into a circle of rocks, or move a metal block to match another sculpture. I've already said this, but I think it bears repeating. I do love the way everything's unlocked immediately in Breath of the Wild, and it isn't something I'd want to change about that game. It's just that we have Breath of the Wild there, so it's not something I want to see again in Tears of the Kingdom. Having ordered dungeons and items obtained in those dungeons also goes hand in hand. You can't just have one or the other. If the dungeons have a set order, but you already have all the tools from the start of the game, there's not much reason for them to be in a set order, since you'd be able to beat the last dungeon from the start anyway. The same goes with the other way around. If you can go into any dungeon from the start and they all have their own items in them, that item can only be helpful in that dungeon, since there's no way to guarantee you'd have the items from the other dungeons at that point in the game. In my mind, these two things go a long way to making Tears of the Kingdom feel like a new game in the series and not just a second Breath of the Wild. Locations for these dungeons could also go back to the classic Zelda forest, desert, snowy mountain, death mountain sort of areas that already exist on the map. They can literally just pull the dungeons out of the ground the way they pull the castle out in the trailers. The series also has a number of sky temples already, so I don't doubt we're going to get plenty to do up there. If they end up bringing the Dark World into this game the way I'm hoping they do, there's plenty more space for dungeons and they can get really creative with the aesthetics. Regardless, whatever they end up doing, I hope it's better than this. When I was playing through Breath of the Wild again, I loved the atmospheric music that plays throughout the game. My main issue with it is that I feel like they went a little too heavy on atmosphere, and ended up with basically no melodies. I'm actually trying to imagine a single song in the game right now, and I can barely think of a couple, whereas if you mention Ocarina of Time to me, I'll immediately think of Kakariko or Gerudo Valley. Wind Waker has Windfall or Dragon Roost Island. Twilight Princess has Midna's Lament and the Mallow Mart. Even Spirit Tracks, a relatively unpopular Zelda game, has one of my favourite video game songs in it with the final boss theme. I find it crazy I can think of practically any Zelda game and immediately have all these great songs flood into my head. But when I think of Breath of the Wild, I can only think of the great gameplay with random piano keys going off. The music in Breath of the Wild does work. It fits the theme of the game that's right there in the title, and it gives you an impression of a wild, untamed land far too dangerous for any composer to get in there and write music for it. Actually, saying that has reminded me of a side quest in the game where you literally find a musician, and in the DLC help them finish their song, so yeah, that tracks. There are even parts of the soundtrack that I love in theory, like when you get to Lon Lon Ranch and... Okay, I've been looking around in gaming on the internet for proof of this, but I can't actually find anything. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing somewhere that the music when you're in the Lon Lon Ranch ruins would be a really slowed down version of the Ocarina of Time Ranch song. But maybe I've dreamed this or something? If anyone knows what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments, because, yeah, I'm pretty confused. Following my theme for Tears of the Kingdom though, the same way I want the map and dungeons to develop, I also want them to be joined by a fully developed soundtrack. I want to get to a big city and be able to put the controller down and just appreciate everything, the style and design, the characters, the music, all together before continuing on. Each dungeon should have music that reflects the area you're in, again something that most Zelda games have done already. I'm not a particularly musical person, so I'm not going to go into detail on what I want them to actually do, because I basically don't know what they can do. I won't ask for more octaves or crescendos, it would be like listening to a child talking about some advanced science. All I know is that I've been listening to a ton of Zelda music in preparation for this video, and Breath of the Wild music barely ever makes an appearance. I'd love for that to change once Tears of the Kingdom comes out. Alright, this last section is going to be a lot quicker. It's just smaller changes I'm hoping will be resolved with the new game. The first one I want to bring up is the clothing abilities. I enjoyed that we were able to change Link's outfits, and I really enjoyed that different gear would help for different things, like one outfit being sneakier and one being used to get into Gerudo Village. What I didn't enjoy so much was using the climbing gear to get to the top of a cliff, only to find an enemy there, meaning I had to pause the game, change my gear to the damage outfit and then start the fight. The same goes for when I came across a river and had to put my Zora outfit on to be able to swim across it easier. My solution for this would be to have some sort of skill tree. Now I know Breath of the Wild has towers that unlock parts of the map, and now I'm asking for skill trees, so this is very rapidly turning into a Ubisoft game. But I really think this would make the skills feel better to use. They could be unlocked with skill points the way health and stamina were in Breath of the Wild, or, the way I'd prefer, they could be unlocked by just playing the game the way you would anyway. You've climbed a kilometer? Here, you now use less stamina when climbing. You've shield surfed for 500 meters? Great. Your shield is now more durable and won't break as easily when you're surfing on it in the future. Putting skills in the game like this will still allow for outfits to be needed for certain things like entering a town or climbing a waterfall, but should take away from the feeling of needing to change your outfit just because you've gone from fighting to climbing. The weapons breaking in Breath of the Wild was something I didn't have a problem with. It fit the world, and if it's something they bring back for Tears of the Kingdom, I'd be fine with it. I did think it was a shame we didn't end up getting some weapons that wouldn't break though. The champion weapons would have been perfect candidates for this. As you go through the game and beat dungeons, you'd get these weapons that might not have the highest damage, but never break. You could then go through and use the higher damage fragile weapons, or the lower damage weapons that never broke as a backup. Hopefully there's something like this in the next game. Another thing I'm hoping for is some more enemy variety. This one won't take long. Think about the last time you played Breath of the Wild. You probably fought a moblin, right? Maybe a Choo-Choo or a Lizalfos. And when it was time to make the game harder, they just changed the colour and threw the same enemy at you with more health and damage. I love this game, but I really want some new enemies alongside the ones that are already there, even if it's just classic Zelda enemies like Tektites, Darknuts or Stalfos. While we're talking about the enemies, the trailers have hinted at us actually having Ganondorf back, and I really hope he actually has some character and personality, and he's not just some husk with pure evil inside him. Calamity Ganon really didn't do anything for me, with him and each of the bosses being nothing more than a force for evil. I just want to have a villain with some depth, even if he is evil through and through. Thanks for watching. As we mentioned in the last video, we had a massive response to our Spider-Man 2 video, so thank you everyone who saw that and got involved on the video. If you're interested in seeing more from us, you can watch Is God of War Ragnarok Worth Your Time? Or Microtransactions Are Ruining Gaming. Thanks!